Military families have incredible stories of perseverance while navigating frequent moves, deployments, food insecurity, transitioning out of the military, and more. This is the place for them to share those stories, highlighting unique experiences of military families. Welcome to the Professional Dependent Podcast. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Professional Dependent Podcast. I have a special guest today that I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation, partly because she's one of the first people that I know almost nothing about going into the show. So this is going to be really, really fun. So, Zülbiye, why don't you introduce yourself? I know you sent me your bio, and it's an amazing bio. Like you are like just reading that, like you've done a lot and you are involved in a lot. So, but why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike, for having me on your show. Really delighted to have this conversation with you. I'm Zülbiye Jorgensen. I'm a military spouse. I've been a military spouse for over 30 years now. So we've gone through active duty, National Guard, and now recently in the Army Reserves. I'm a foreign-born military spouse. So
Mhm.
my story started in Germany, or our story started in Germany, early 1990s, and then we traveled a little bit, and then really settled for a long time in the Midwest, where my husband's family is from. And now, most recently, about 2 years ago, settled in Arizona. So we're really liking that part. I am a professional. I work in the healthcare industry and have been in the healthcare industry for nearly 20 years, and I've done a variety of different roles, but we're currently in the digital transformation space.
Mhm.
I'm a mother, and a very proud one too, because I think having children is probably one of the most amazing things that can happen to us as humans. And they're, of course, grown up now and doing their own thing. So, very, very happy about that. And what else can I tell you? I love getting involved in um, organizations as a volunteer who are looking out for individuals who are not maybe able to help themselves. So
Mhm.
currently engaged in Arrowhead, which is a local organization here in Arizona, and they focus on helping formerly incarcerated women. And my engagement there is really providing them professional mentorship,
Mhm.
and really enjoy that connection to the community and giving back. So that makes it a lot easier. But otherwise, really just really enjoy the fact that I have a diverse background, being Turkish and having
Mhm.
grown up in Germany, but really settled in the US. I think it makes a person uh, in, interesting in itself, because you sort
Mhm.
of take all best of three worlds and just kind of put it into one. So really proud of that, and also shows in all of my engagements when I reach out to individuals in terms of building network. That really comes out. I just get energized by engaging with a variety of different individuals from various backgrounds. So that is really me, military spouse, a mom, and then a professional.
Awesome. I really like that you said that you work basically helping people transition out of the corrections space that are, convicted felons that are trying to get back into society. I was a correctional officer at one point.
Oh,
I'm probably one of the few people that I know of that worked corrections that will tell you I enjoyed every minute of it.
oh, great.
It was all the facility I was in. I actually did corrections twice. Once was it was a jail back in my hometown. That was very interesting because I had gone to school and personally knew probably 80% of the people that were incarcerated there. So
Wow.
that made for a
Yeah.
very interesting time. And then right before we left Louisiana, I had gotten back into corrections and worked with the sheriff's office, and it was a minimum security facility, but I was probably one of the few that would go back into the dorms and just talk to get people. It was an all male facility. I would go back there and just I
Yeah.
would go into the we had one block that was mainly kind of like the older cats. I'd go in there and play chess. I'd go play spades with some of the younger guys. I'd go back and watch TV with them, like just walking around hanging out. And when I tell you I could get more done by going up to two people and saying, "Hey, we not saying y'all've got extra towels and stuff, but we've got more people coming in and we're running short. You think maybe some could show up? Got you,
Oh,
Sarge, got
interesting.
you." And next thing you know, hey, we found all these towels. I don't know where they came from. And there was another guy I worked with that would go back there and yell and scream and kick stuff over. And it's just like, dude, like they're still people, man. Like these are still human beings. I called everybody sir,
Hmm. Hmm.
Mister.
Yeah.
That little showing them that little common decency it was
Yeah.
honestly a game changer between the way the rest of the people worked on my shift and me. It was really fun.
That's amazing. I might have to reach out to you. And when I get involved in the lives of these women, is generally once they have been released from the
Hmm.
prison, but really, and that's a critical moment where they sort of need to establish,
Yes.
what am I going to do next? And
Hmm.
it can be very challenging. And I think we as professionals, because we know their professional environment, let's just put our heads together and see what we can do for them. So we're really building a formal mentorship. We sort of incorporated it into like a couple of different cohorts, learned
Hmm.
from it, and then now we're really trying to drive it to the next level. So I really enjoy it because I get to see the world from a different
Hmm.
perspective, learn from that population, um, which is exposed to a lot of things that
Yes.
I don't think most people are exposed to, which I guess I'm grateful for that we are not exposed
Hmm.
to. But definitely, just like you said, really understanding where they're coming from and meeting them where they are, really providing that support and engagement, I think it's so critical. So that's wonderful to hear that you had a good experience.
Oh, I will be the first to tell you that there are some of the smartest and nicest people I've ever met were locked up.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They really are. Some of them are incredibly kind and very intelligent. Some of them are the exact opposite end of that spectrum. But
Sure.
but
Sure.
anyway, we didn't get on here to talk about
No.
corrections. That you said that, and I was like, oh, I've been in that space before, and I was a police officer for 8 years and did
Oh,
corrections
wow. You
for.
definitely understand
Oh
a
yeah,
lot
I
more about that. Yeah.
I absolutely do. It is a world I'm intimately familiar with. But anyway, so kind of bringing it back to the point of why we're here today, that was just a little lane yap, I guess. Um, so you've done a lot. You've said you're a healthcare professional for 18 years. Is that what you said?
Nearly 20
Nearly
years. Yeah.
20,
Well over
which
19 now. Yeah.
that is awesome. My wife is public health in the Air Force, so and then I've got a lot of other healthcare people in my family. So how do you find yourself? Because you reached out to me whenever on LinkedIn, and I started talking about wanting to have another guest on, trying to find people, and you said you enjoyed talking about military spouse employment. Um, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me personally because military
Mhm.
spouse, and I've been unemployed multiple times. So how did you find yourself even getting involved in this advocacy space? Because almost
Mhm.
every spouse has a story about kind of how they accidentally found themselves as an advocate, or
Absolutely.
something kind of steered them in a way. So how did you find yourself in this space?
Yeah. So first, probably a couple of reasons. First one is really my children are grown up, so I kind of needed to focus on something that was meaningful outside of work.
Hmm.
And then I didn't have to really think too long about it, what it needed to be. I also made an experience. So my husband has been in the National Guard mostly, but now recently in the Army Reserve. But in 2017, when he was in the National Guard, he had the opportunity to take on an active duty assignment in Germany. And what happened there for me was really get to know some women who have been actually essentially accompanying their spouses and
Hmm.
not really having their own identity or even profession. And all they
Hmm.
do is sort of, go from one location to another every 2 to 3 years. And when I observed that, it was an eye opener for me. I felt very fortunate for having an occupation that
Hmm.
I have a little control over and that I can actually, do things that I find challenging and really gives me the purpose, right? And
Hmm.
that's so critical when we sort of lose purpose in life. or our own identity, then we
Mhm.
don't really, it's just not a good place to be. All sorts of
Right.
things sets in and depression and things like that. And we don't find ourselves worthy. So that was really the main reason. I just wanted to kind of dig deeper into that
Mhm.
problem. Why is it that military spouses are unemployed?
Mhm.
And is it really the case? And data is out there, 22% of military spouses are unemployed. And then, of course, nobody really knows the percentage of the underemployment, which
Mhm.
is essentially settling for employment that you are well overqualified for.
Mhm.
So that is the reason why I wanted to explore that a little bit. And I did that in a way, again, it's not part of my healthcare profession. It's actually,
Right.
I'm doing this on the side.
Mhm.
And a couple of things happened in the process. Of course, I had to figure out how to get hold of military spouses. So
Mhm.
I really joined certain social media platforms just to really get in connection with them, explain to them what I'm trying to do. And I really would love to speak with them. And I had the opportunity to speak to 50 over 50 individuals from various branches,
Mhm.
all six branches actually, and variety of phases in their lives.
Mhm.
And so some were very, very young, right early on in the beginning of their military journey, and then some had been in there for well over 15 years. And so it was a great eye opener, and it is definitely true. So the validation is it's very challenging to
Mhm.
have an occupation, and of course, there are the other key findings I wanted to sort of get see what else comes out. And then I think the goal is really not to just talk about them because a lot of people do already talk about it,
Mhm.
but more so, what are some things, tools, and systems or processes that we can create where the individuals can actually do it themselves
Mhm.
rather than waiting for the government to pass an executive order that then will take several years to even be implemented
Mhm.
if is support to actually build the systems in order to do that. So really, I wanted to give individuals the information that they need, the tools that they need to help themselves. And that's kind of the main focus of what I want to do, with understanding that there are other things that can be done through the government, of course.
Mhm.
And there are opportunities there that I will also talk a little bit, but those will take longer. Those will also require a lot of engagement from other individuals, policymakers, and the only thing that I can do right now is really reach out to people, talk about what the problem is and how what possible solutions exist, and how we can empower military spouses themselves to help
Mhm.
themselves. So that's really why I wanted to do it, and then some of the preliminary insights into what I found out.
Awesome. So that's great that you're actually able to reach out to that many different spouses across all the different branches. That's amazing. What were some of the things that you discovered during those conversations? Like, whether was there any commonality in the themes and the things they were saying? Was there a thread that kind of you're like, oh, I've heard this from almost every single person I've spoken to about the challenges they faced in finding
Yeah.
employment as a spouse.
Oh, great question, Mike. Definitely lots of commonalities. The challenges in terms of employment are very similar, and
Mhm.
many of them experience it. And then, of course, the other additional challenge is it's one thing being in the US and
Mhm.
moving every 2, 3 years, but once you actually go across the ocean
Yeah.
into another country, that's a totally different level of challenges with respect to employment because there are
Mhm.
specific rules that we have to follow. Um, the so those are some of the challenges that were very familiar. Lots of movements. People then get discouraged. They don't
Mhm.
even try anymore, right? Because they've tried so many times. And a lot of times they hear, well, why don't you volunteer? Put in the time. Put in the
Mhm.
time. Of course, volunteer work is very important. And I think you can be a professional and still be volunteer, just like myself, because volunteer work gives us an opportunity to work for something that we believe in and that we're
Mhm.
aligned with our values. So but that should not be the sole thing.
Right.
That should just be part of it and not the sole thing. So a lot of spouses are actually doing volunteer work because they can't just get anything else. So those are some of the commonalities. The the one thing I did notice is spouses that actually are very, very successful at maintaining a profession while they're accompanying their service members, they do certain things that
Hmm.
I think is worth mentioning, and that's one of some of the things I want to really get into a little bit more. They have an opportunity, or they have the desire to network, and I
Hmm.
think that's great way to build your network as you're traveling and to these various locations. And today, of course, with the technology, we are networking expanded greatly. So networking is important, and the way you would want to do networking in person is always better than virtual. But if
Hmm.
the only way you can do it is virtual, that's what you do. And the way you would want to do that is really think about where you want to go, what topics are important to you, what professions you want to maybe explore, and those are the individuals you reach out to.
Hmm.
And there's ways to do that, and you will get no's.
Yeah.
I've got many, many no's, and what you do is you take that no, and then go into
Hmm.
the next person. It's not personal. It's not you. It's just that people sometimes don't have the time, capacity, or the interest in helping others. So that's networking is probably one of the things. The other thing that they do is once they have an employment, they figure out a way to really illustrate the value that they bring to the organization. And that may be a very close relationship with their supervisors, their team leads, and continuously articulate the value. And
Hmm.
when they do that, and if the profession lends itself to be able to do it remotely, then they actually are able to convince their employer to do the work remotely, and which is
Hmm.
an amazing thing. And I've actually done it myself when my husband was in Germany in 2017. I didn't realize that other employers were actually going for it either. But those are some of the opportunities that they take advantage of, and some that can't be turned into remote. However, they may be an opportunity in that same company that could be done remotely, and that might be the opportunity that they
Hmm.
then get. So there are different ways that they sort of work the employer into this opportunity. The other piece, this has actually happened very frequently, in particular for foreign-born military spouses, where their education and their professional experience really may not mean anything in the U.S., right,
Hmm.
or in another country because it's just so different. These individuals are more so an entrepreneur. They actually look at the military environment that they're in, look at any gaps that exist in that community,
Hmm.
and sort of use their skills to fill that gap. For example, one individual, she was actually a teacher for 10 years and could not become a teacher because her certification was outside of the US.
Hmm.
So she actually created a business, dog training business, because she felt passionate about dog training.
Hmm.
And that was something needed in the community of the military. And that's what she's doing. So it's those types of things. It's really not waiting for someone to necessarily bring that opportunity to you every single time,
Hmm.
but looking for that opportunity. And I think there's immense power and this is exactly what I've shared with those military spouses. Share those stories, and let others know that this is something you can do for yourself. And I think we need to be a lot better at doing that and helping each other. So
Hmm.
really, I empower anybody, just like what I'm doing here, to go out there, reach out, tell the story, because there's so much that we can teach the rest of the world, the rest of the US, what military spouses stand for. And
Hmm.
it is tough. It is a tough life, and we have to recognize that. But there are things that we can do. There are things that we can influence others to help us with. And there's always going to be challenges, but we can help ourselves to drive this unemployment rate lower. And then also certainly work the policy side of things too. That's also important.
Yeah, and one thing about the 22% unemployment rate is that's only the people that are actively looking for work. That doesn't count the spouses that may have gone, you know what, I've been trying to get a job for 5 years. I give up.
Right.
That doesn't even include those numbers anymore. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and you mentioned, how important networking is. Obviously, we connected over LinkedIn. I've been able to connect with several other military spouses in recent months via LinkedIn, which that is a network that I began using strictly as trying to grow my professional network, and then it was suggested, hey, why don't you reach out on LinkedIn to try to grow your military spouse network? That way, I
Absolutely.
can help tell these stories because that's what I like telling stories. Like I like telling your story. I like hearing other people tell their stories because, like you said, the stories are. It makes other people realize that they're not alone in the things that they're facing and the things that they're going through. They realize, oh,
Mhm.
there's people out there that understand what this means, how hard this is, and they may have answers that I haven't thought of yet. Another thing you
Said,
mentioned
well
was
said.
showing value to a potential employer. So I mean, the first, that one for me sounds like if you're already employed and you have the potential to go overseas, really, that's where showing the value is really going to pay off for possibly getting
Mhm.
that network position or that possibility of a remote position going overseas. Um,
Absolutely.
how would you suggest that spouses even begin to approach that? Let's say you just got orders. You're like, oh man, I've been with this company for 2 years. We just got orders to Ramstein. How would you
Mhm.
suggest that person even begin that conversation? That's got to be a crazy conversation to even think about starting.
Yeah, great question, Mike. Of course, if you're at that stage when you have your orders,
Hmm.
it's a little bit more limited. So I will address that first, but then I will talk about when you actually start doing this. It starts way earlier than that. So when you do get your order, and this did happen to my husband and I, and when he got his order to go to Germany, and my family lives in Germany, so I was really torn because I decided I did not want to go with him, even
Hmm.
though he could certainly take his family. I decided to stay back because I felt even though my employer is very friendly in terms of military support, and I knew that they would work something out with me, and this is
Hmm.
what I did. I researched what's the potential for me to do my work remotely.
Hmm.
What are some challenges that might present itself, and how can we address those? So my work could have been done remotely.
Hmm.
And so then I researched what that means in the organization. Is anybody else doing that? What are the policies and procedures? So I did all that research. I also did research in terms of getting contact with the lawyers in the organization because you want to protect yourself as an employee as well as the employer because you don't want to expose them to any tax
Hmm.
violations and things like that. So in my case, I basically did all the homework. I
Hmm.
created the proposal, and it's a very short one-page proposal. And today you can do that way easier utilizing generative AI type of tools. But back then I didn't have it. So I did that and then met with the lawyer along with my supervisor and said, hey, this is what I would like to propose. This is what I
Hmm.
like to do. And what I proposed was that I would actually work once a quarter, so full month in a
Hmm.
quarter overseas, but they actually allowed me to do up to 180 days,
Oh, nice.
which essentially in a given calendar year, which
Hmm.
essentially is, I think, the maximum tax limit that they could handle.
Right.
So it's likely different for other organizations. So that's what you do. So you
Hmm.
have to act quickly, you have to do your homework, you do the proposal, sort of spoon feed it to your supervisor,
Right.
and then have that conversation and see how it goes. And then, of course, in terms of hours and differences, so that takes some negotiation, right?
Hmm.
I wanted to be in Germany to spend time with my spouse and not necessarily be on a Zoom call or
Hmm.
work when everybody else in the U.S. was working. So, there's also some negotiation there that you can certainly do. But certain meetings, like I will not miss, right? Those are
Right.
critical departmental meetings. So that's how you would do it if you presented it right now and you didn't have time to prepare. But if you already know you're a military spouse, you're going to probably move every 2 to 3 years. You start that conversation early on.
Hmm.
So you essentially looking for opportunities. If your job today does not lend itself well for remote work, you may be looking for opportunities in the organization that actually does, and start connecting with those areas, with those hiring managers, so you can kind of do the networking and be ready to take on positions like those that will enable you to make the move. Definitely need to understand what the organization's um, I guess organization's willingness is in
Hmm.
terms of tax liabilities and things like that, what they will allow, and you will have more time to do that research. But when I say illustrating value, you really need to think about what are some initiatives or projects or assignments that I want to take on
Hmm.
that are challenging, that are going to, one, allow you to grow in your profession and your career and your skills, but then also are impactful to the organization. Like, for example, in my case, what I wanted to do is we needed to convert, you know, having 11 different vendors into
Hmm.
one vendor to be able to do telemedicine. So
Hmm.
that's an important initiative, right? So I wanted to be engaged in it. So you look for those opportunities and ask for those opportunities.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're going to say no because somebody else is going to be assigned, but don't let the no to stop you from continuously looking for it. So it really align yourself with the organizational priorities. So then you kind of know, okay, here are the things I'm going to do. Here are the things I'm going to look for, opportunities. And then when you keep doing that, people are just going to come to you
Hmm.
eventually because they know the your skill set. They know what you have done. They know what you have contributed. And that becomes easier. But early on, that is how you do it. So you look for those opportunities and ask for it. So that is sort of how you kind of create the value, how you
Hmm.
can get your employer on your side in terms of doing the work remotely, and look for those opportunities. If your current work does not allow you to be remote, look for those opportunities in the organization first, because you already have the familiarity with the organization and the culture. So that's what I would suggest.
So it sounds like basically what you're doing is you are digging into that company's values and figuring out a way to answer their questions before they even have them. That way you
Yeah,
can be like, these
absolutely.
are the benefits that I can still bring to the organization from abroad or from even just from another state if you're moving just from coast to coast.
Absolutely. And if I may add, so I am super passionate about this AI
Mm.
developments around the various industries. And right now, it's an opportunity. If you're a very young spouse, um, here's what you do: you look for opportunities, jobs that you can do just from anywhere.
Hmm.
And so, in the AI space, pretty much all of them can be done remotely. So
Hmm.
if you have a desire to learn that side of the technology, if you have a desire to be in that realm of work, do whatever you can, whether that's taking classes. And there's so many free ones out there
Hmm.
too that you can certainly take advantage of. Or even, if you have the opportunity to go to college to actually get a degree in that space, do that. Some people might not have the luxury of doing that right now, given the time. Maybe they don't have the time, but you can do certain things like for free and
Hmm.
look for those opportunities. There are other professions where you can actually do those remotely, and it's a lot easier to find those. So those are the ones I would really recommend individuals to look into, especially if they're at an early phase in their military life.
I know. So I am all about AI. I use it frequently for I'll type something in and I'm like, hey, I'll go to Chat GPT and I'm like, rewrite this paragraph for YouTube. Rewrite this as a podcast intro. I use it a lot. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's I think what people and what I did was I found an opportunity similar to what you're mentioning. There was an opportunity through the University of Central Florida, and it was a free certification for not necessarily like the inner workings of AI, but basically it was an intro to AI, learning how to use it, learning what it can't do,
Hmm.
and that way you can learn how to apply it in different areas. And I took that class, and it was really eye opening. I don't think people understand there's still other people behind AI. It's not it it we're not looking at a Skynet situation. It's never going to really get to that point because it's
Yeah.
not the way it's designed. And it really one of the I love hearing people say, well, it's allowing all these people to cheat. It's like, well, as soon as they figured out a way to cheat, they figured out a way to catch it. So and
Hmm.
people have been learning how to cheat since the dawn of time. That's like
Yeah.
not new.
You're right. And it really accelerates learning from my perspective, right? So
Mhm,
you get to learn so much, you get to do so many things. One of the opportunities I think that there is, if you are in an organization and have a position, if you can automate some of the repetitive tasks that we
mhm,
do manually, I mean, that is amazingly beneficial to the organization. It creates that operational excellence that
mhm,
any organization is looking for. So that if you have the time and the opportunity within the job that you're in now, do it, because
mhm,
that will definitely show the value that you bring in, because you're saving the organization a lot of money that way, and time is
mhm.
very valuable, of course,
Yeah.
we all know that.
Yeah. See, it's the only thing that we all have the same amount of.
Exactly.
So, um, and honestly, some of these things we just talked about was, um, you know, the barriers to employment for military spouses, and a lot of this we just talked about. But how do you, what are some areas that you see that we could potentially remove barriers from potential employers for spouses?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot for employers too. But I was thinking maybe some of the other barriers, and maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, the first thing is, employers don't really understand
Hmm.
what military life is all about, right? A lot of times, unless they are heavily engaged in the military side of things, right? So
Hmm.
it's our job to really articulate what it is really being in the military, and that's really up to us. We have the leverage to tell our story, and even it's my responsibility, being in the organization that I'm in, to do my job to inform them what military life is.
Hmm.
However, I will say that I did not always have that position, because talking about being a military spouse, especially in certain phases of your career, could potentially hinder you, because you might be perceived as something that you can't maybe do
Hmm.
something, because you don't have the time, because your spouse is all gone all the time. Now you have the family, you have to do household, and then you can't really possibly focus 100% on your profession. So that might hold you back a little bit. At least that's how I felt
Hmm.
when I was going through early phases in my career. But now where I feel very comfortable, I can actually have those conversations. Because if you really think about, when I talk to people in the community, or even with colleagues, when people hear military spouse, this is what they imagine in their mind. It's somebody who's anywhere between 20 and 30 years old. It's definitely a female, not a male,
Hmm.
and somebody with three, four children, right?
Hmm.
This is what they're thinking, and usually stay at home mom. And that is not the case. And that is one part of the research that I've done. Really want to articulate what military spouses are. We
Mhm.
have male military spouses who are super disadvantaged because the system is set up for female, and
Mhm.
majority of them are female. And that's okay. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but we have this other portion of the military spouses that we're not doing justice to. Um, Military spouses are all ages, right? We come,
Mhm.
very, very young because we tend to get married very early. But then we also have individuals who are well into their 30s and some of them in their 40s. So we have wide range of military spouses that have education. They're very well educated. They have variety of different experiences. And here's the other thing: they have experiences from multiple industries.
Mhm.
That is not something that, so even myself, I have great experience in healthcare. However, the rest of the military spouses, because of the move that they're doing and because of continuously looking for new opportunities to work at, they tend to switch industries. So there's
Mhm.
this huge opportunity that they bring to the table, and we don't probably talk about it very often. So those are some of the things that we can do to really articulate to employers in terms of here's what military is,
Mhm.
here's how we can contribute, here's some of the skills we bring to the table. And the skills are really, they're very common skills that we are very good at, and that is one, well, cultural intelligence,
Mhm.
emotional intelligence, problem solving, right? And then change management is, those are some of the things that come to my mind right away, because we go through change so much,
Mhm.
and talk about not having control over your own life. So now you have to fit into something where you got to figure out in a creative way, well, how do you manage your household? How do you
Mhm.
manage your children? How do you find the new things? And how do you establish your network? Right, your personal network in case you need help because you don't have your family
Mhm.
around. Those are all great skills that we don't tend to talk about them. Um, we don't tend to brag about them, but I
Mhm.
think, and I have been also told, you need to brag about these things because they're not just given. You
Right.
actually go through experiences to learn these skills. So that is what we can do. We can continuously, again, it's all about telling our story
Mhm.
in a variety of different ways and variety of different venues. So when I have, even with my community work that I'm doing volunteer work, part of my work is really telling that military spouse story,
Mhm.
because I take that as a responsibility and I like doing it. Obviously, I have passion for it because I believe in it, and military spouses are not going to go away because our military is not going to go away, and we're going to need that security and support, protection. Um, I guess, fortunately, unfortunately, many, many years to come.
Mhm.
And our military spouses are big, big, uh, I guess, variable in the success of the military.
Mhm.
Because if you're a strong military spouse, if you're successful, you're going to make sure that your service member is successful at what they're doing, and that's what they need. and
Mhm.
and when they're successful, when their personal life is going great, they're going to do a great job, and we're going to be better off as a nation. So that is how I connect the dots in terms of looking
Mhm.
at it from a global impact perspective. But yeah, there are some things we can certainly do with our employers, and those of us who are maybe out in the public can do more.
Mhm.
Being in these venues, maybe volunteer to speak at venues and talk about these openly.
Do you think more military spouses need to be involved with going out and looking to speak at companies? I know you just said like going to these venues and speaking. Having military spouses in the position to speak with the decision makers, I think, is really critical in changing the outlook on military spouse employment. I can give you one example. I was interviewing for a position in Georgia, and I'd had two interviews with them, one via Zoom, and then another in person. And the whole time I've been telling them, we're a military family. My wife is active duty. And for whatever reason, until I got to the in-person interview, it's like they didn't make the connection that I was the military spouse. Like we were active
Interesting.
duty, even though I said it multiple times. And then, because in the interview, they asked the question that I have since learned to reword. One of these days I'm gonna figure out how to get that turned off on Zoom. I don't
Oh.
understand. But um it came they asked the question that said, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
And
that's
I
a
and I
very
and I looked at
basic
him and
question.
said, I honestly have zero idea. I said I have no idea. I've since learned how to how I would have answered that question differently. But I told
Mhm.
him I'm a military spouse. I don't know where I'm going to be next year. I don't know where I'm going to be. I could it's like in 5 years I could have moved twice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So and that the entire tone of the conversation shifted. Like it just immediately went to they were done talking to me. They were very quick to get through the rest of that interview, and everybody's body language changed. And I was thinking, I was like, if there was, and one of the guys there was a prior Marine. He was in the Marine Corps at one point, and I was like, if anybody in the room should have been able to say, you know what, I get it,
Hmm.
would have been that guy. But
Yeah.
nobody's like they even he was like, oh great, like
Yeah.
just get this over with.
Yeah, and I am sure you are not the only one that actually has made that experience, and you're really answering the question in an honest way, right?
Mhm,
And what they were looking for is something that somebody that's not necessarily a military spouse would answer it, right? And you know that.
mhm,
Yeah, it's definitely a great example that illustrates that employers really don't know what military spouses are and military life is.
mhm.
And yeah, we can certainly do better at, we ourselves can do better at it. And and especially if you're a hiring manager, right? So as a hiring manager, I can look for these things. I understand what they are.
Mhm.
I know if somebody is, military spouse or not. Generally, I don't know that they're military spouses, right?
Right.
But if they have been in the military, I can tell right away from
Mhm.
their resume. And I might be a totally different person, or I might interview that person in a different way than
Mhm.
maybe my colleagues who are not very familiar with the military space, right? So definitely work to be done.
Right. So, do you know of any ways that we could get more involved in maybe speaking to like other areas that hiring managers and other HR professionals go that spouses that are involved in this advocacy space could try to
Mhm.
reach out
Yeah,
to have conversations with them to maybe
absolutely.
educate them a little bit better?
Absolutely. So, a couple of things that come to my mind. One, there are great organizations that are already
Mhm.
actually trying to do that. So, Hiring Our Heroes, I
Yep.
would say, is probably one that comes up a lot. And I have actually used them, and they are
Mhm.
phenomenal.
They're a great organization.
Yeah, and there are others that are not as effective. So if you figure, and that's the other thing, I wanted to do an inventory of all of them
Mhm.
and how effective they were based on the research that I did. So,
Mhm.
so I will definitely have that shared. But that Hiring Our Heroes is probably the top, that came to the top, and they've done great things. So they are doing great things. They're bringing employers. They are sharing the story of the military spouse, sharing the military story. The other thing I just actually discovered, there are lots of skill bridge events that are going on. So again,
Mhm.
it's directed to our service members. However, anytime they have those events at any of the installations, at the military installations, they bring tons of HR
Mhm.
professionals to those, and from a variety of different organizations. For example, the organization I'm working for, they're going to have one, I believe, in April nearby at an Air Force base. So there are recruiters that are going out there. So what we can do, because military service members are going to be at those, they need to also tell the story of the spouses. So what I try to do actually in my organization is, okay, we're doing this all for the service members, and
Mhm.
they definitely need it. What can we do for the spouses?
Mhm.
What is there that we can do for spouses? Because a lot of the work that they're doing is actually, not all of them are remote, but a lot of them are remote. And the answer I usually get is we don't have the resources to do this.
Hmm.
Right. So it's really, I mean, you have to have manpower to be able to focus on this. So, but what we can do is we can sort of insert ourselves on the other side when they come to the installation, maybe have the spouses there as well, in addition to the service members who are
Hmm.
going through this course, because I think it's equally beneficial. You establish in the network. The program might not be specific for the spouses, but
Hmm.
you get a chance to actually talk to people from HR, from these various
Hmm.
organizations. I think that is something beneficial, and we should definitely um, utilize that. That's one way where we can actually have that in-person connection. And sometimes they're done remotely, but I think now that we have passed the pandemic, a lot of this is
Hmm.
happening in person. So that's how I envision it. And it where we actually have control over. We can
Right.
actually have whoever that commander is. I think a lot of it is dependent on how the commander works, is what I'm also learning or have learned through the
Hmm.
research. Because the commander can be super friendly in terms of the various programs, or they
Hmm.
can sort of shut it down completely, and there's not much that we can do, right? So
Right.
very dependent on that. Does that help? Or
No, it does. No, and
okay.
I love that you mentioned SkillBridge because it was I've known about SkillBridge since 2016 because one of my wife's airmen was she was separating and she was the first person I ever heard mention SkillBridge. And then recently, I think it's within the last 2 years, they've started letting spouses partake in SkillBridge also.
Awesome. Yeah, I
And I
would.
think that's a fantastic thing that they're doing.
Yeah, that's definitely valuable because you're really dealing with those HR people, and
Hmm.
they can be so helpful in establishing that bridge
Hmm.
into the organization. So yeah, that's great that they're doing that.
Yeah, there's I mean it's just like the service member, there's certain things that have to meet and I don't think they get quite as much exposure for it as the service member does, but I hate to say it, I mean something's better than nothing at this point. Like
Yeah,
just the simple
absolutely,
fact that we're being allowed to even partake in that event or in that program is pretty phenomenal.
absolutely.
What are some other barriers? You mentioned other barriers that you wanted to talk about. What are some other barriers that you've encountered?
The barriers in term. Oh yeah, so I think it's more so what we can do maybe with the assistance of the government in terms
Hmm.
of what are some things that we can do. So, things that come to my mind. So, military spouses are doing things based on what's available in their current
Hmm.
environment. So, because they move, then things change, right?
Right.
So, we have individuals, for example, where they actually get an education, where they
Hmm.
pay for an education and be and so they can get, let's say, radiologist
Hmm.
or maybe radiology technician or
Hmm.
paramedic or whatever the case might be, but then they pay for it.
Right.
So they pay for it. I think one of the opportunities might be, and I'm not for giving anything for free, but if we have
Hmm.
any funds to give away, forgive college tuition and whatnot, that would be the one population I would focus at, because they're really doing things in with the information that they have at the
Hmm.
time and the environment that they're in. But then things change. They cannot, if you do your, let's say, technician
Hmm.
education in the US and then you are overseas for the next 10 years,
Right.
there's no way for you to really do that profession, but
Hmm.
yet you paid for that education. So that might be an opportunity where our, again, government could perhaps look at that cohort of
Hmm.
military spouses and think about if there are opportunities to forgive their loans or whatever the case might be. That's an opportunity for sure. The SOFA agreements
Hmm.
across all the various countries that we fortunately or unfortunately at really limits. And it's
Yes.
very different based on where you are. And I think there's an opportunity there. I'm not an expert in
Hmm.
SOFA, but but I think there are a lot more smarter people that can actually dive into it and come up with recommendation what that might
Hmm.
need to be. Because I don't think they had been looked at recently where they actually renegotiated those, right?
They
So those are some
they
of the
have not.
barriers. Yeah, those are some of the barriers that come to my mind that
Hmm.
would help individuals that are not necessarily in the US.
Hmm.
And then, of course, we all talk about the licensure of,
Right.
in terms of military. There are a lot of military spouses who are very passionate about the profession that they're in terms of therapist,
Hmm.
counseling, and even, being a vet or physician or nurses and all of those various
Hmm.
profession that require licensure per state.
Yeah.
And every time they move, they have to do a lot of other things, and it's very
Oh
costly.
yeah.
I mean, like in the organization that I work at, this is a healthcare organization, we actually have a whole team that
Hmm.
does that for our medical professionals, the recertification and things like that, that they have licensure and
Oh
all of
yeah.
that they have to go through. And here, with as a military spouse, you're on your own. You don't even know where to start.
Hmm.
And each state is different. Even though there's the executive order, you must do this. There's no process in place for the
Hmm.
states to actually go through it. No systems in place, so you have to figure that out. So those are some of the really big challenges that come to my mind, because those professions are very important and critical, but yet you can't do them remotely, right? A lot of
Hmm.
times you have to be in person for those. And if we could help them to really maintain their licensure and ensure that they meet the requirements as they move, I think it would be a great opportunity as well.
It's funny that you mentioned veterinarians because my wife was actually a veterinarian by trade, and then she joined the Air Force right after vet school. And if it's you're exactly right. If she wanted to continue practicing veterinary medicine, we've lived in this is the fifth different state we've lived in since she's joined. So that would
Wow.
be five different states because there's no reciprocity with veterinary medicine across the boards. Like you can't
Yeah,
you take the NAVLE, so the big national test, but then you also have to, depending on the state, you may have to take a state specific test.
absolutely. Yeah. It makes
So,
it
and it's
very
expensive.
difficult.
It is
Yeah,
very
it's
expensive.
very expensive. So true. So that might be an opportunity where, hey, this is another cost that we're
Hmm.
willing to forgive. Again, I'm just sort of throwing these out there, but this is the burden. This is an
Hmm.
additional burden on the military families, and we
Yes.
need to really recognize that. And yes, did we sign up that we are
Mhm.
going to do the military? Yes, we did. Can we lighten the load? I think yes, there's an
Mhm.
opportunity to lighten the load.
When you mentioned the SOFA agreements, I know SOFA's been this. It seems to be a hot topic lately. One of my previous guests, Ellen Sumney, she's a military spouse whose husband is Air Force, and she lives in Norway. He's at the embassy in Norway, which I'm super jealous of because I imagine that has to be absolutely gorgeous. And she and I discussed that SOFA really hasn't been looked at since almost since the Cold War
Wow.
because
Yeah,
some of
it's
the
fun.
because we were going through the requirements for military spouses to be able to work from home abroad, and you have to have the embassy come out and inspect your home, and
Mhm.
there's all this stuff, and it's like, yeah, okay, wonderful, if we were still worried about people putting bugs in our phones and cameras in the walls, but this is not a 1950s spy flick. This is we're in 2020s. We can afford to look at this and maybe update it a
Absolutely.
little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That I would be totally for that. And I think it will help a lot of the
Mhm.
spouses, especially those that are overseas. And of course, they vary, right? Germany is going to be
Mhm.
different from Italy,
Yep.
and Italy is going to be even more different than South Korea and so forth. So,
Mhm.
very, very good point and great opportunity to look into that.
Yeah, it's there's definitely work to be done, and it's like I've military spouse employment is it's an onion, right? Like we're never going to have a single answer to fix all of it. But what we can do is we can do what you're saying, and it's learn to use our network better, learn to answer people's questions before they realize they have the question. That way we already have the answer for them. And there's definitely lots of things that can be done. Um, another question I had for you is, and you kind of mentioned this with the speaking about the licensure forgiveness, is, you know, being educated. That's been one of the things that have been pushed on spouses or pushed towards spouses for years. Hey, y'all just get your degree, get your degree, get your degree. Well, I went out and because I'm a glutton for punishment, I have two master's degrees, which I know you do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you think there becomes a point where spouses are told to get educated, and so we go out and we educate ourselves to a pretty high level?
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the actual percentage is. Um, I meant to look it up again after my last podcast, but military spouses, percentage wise, are some of the highest educated people per capita within our social groups. So
Mm-hmm.
if you take, 30 to 45-year-old military spouses and compare them to non-military spouses, we have, I want to say it's almost 30% more advanced degrees. The-
Yeah, I've read something similar to that. Yeah.
but do you think there comes a time where we can be too educated and it kind of starts becoming a hindrance?
Well, I would say I'm going to answer that in a couple of different ways.
Okay.
First of all, my position for to education, because of my background,
Hmm.
my family is from Turkey, and my dad always said education will take you far.
Yes. Hmm.
Right. So that's a totally different world that I came from. So education for me is very, very important. It's sort of
Hmm.
in my DNA. And I work for an organization, an academic organization. They're all about
Hmm.
education, continuous learning. So that is just me personally and my background. But you have a great point. Because if I compare the rest of the world,
Hmm.
even the profession that I'm in, comparing myself to other colleagues in other organizations that are
Hmm.
similar, their bachelor's degree is probably it, right? So
Hmm.
that's all you need, really. You don't need anything more than that, unless you have the desire to do other things,
Hmm.
with a graduate degrees. Yes, I also agree with you that even the individuals that I interviewed, there's a high percentage of individuals, not only master's degree, but also
Hmm.
PhDs, which if you're a researcher and have your PhD, there's not much you can do being a military spouse because you have
Right.
to be in the lab and you don't have the opportunities to do that. So I think education is critical, important if it is part of helping you to get advanced in the
Hmm.
profession that you're in. And in my, from my perspective, I think really it's the basic type of education that you have is all that you really need because there are opportunities, from my perspective, in the environment that you're in. You can get certifications and other education that continuously teach you
Hmm.
without necessarily have to get the degree. However, I will say that what else do you do if you don't have a job and you feel like I need to be challenged, I want to
Hmm.
feel good about myself, and I need a purpose. And that is probably why military spouses are going for an additional degree
Hmm.
or for a graduate degree because there are also benefits in terms of reimbursement for education. Maybe some of them are actually taking advantage of the GI Bill rather than their spouse. So they're and they really believe in the fact that the education is going to take them further. And what I'm finding out is it's really education is great, especially if it's a position that you're striving to get that requires a college degree, because
Hmm.
that's a minimum requirement a lot of times. However, from my perspective, in terms of continuously adding additional education, you really need to think about the cost and benefit
Hmm.
analysis. You could certainly take that time and focus on other things, and that is what I started doing. I just had time on my hand when cybersecurity was really, really hot at the time, where I'm
Hmm.
like, well, I kind of want to learn more about it, and so that And this my employer actually offered to pay for a lot of it, and I
Nice.
had a very small cost, so I kind of went for that. But I probably could have done a different thing that would have
Mm-hmm.
been maybe even more valuable today. So you really kind of have to think about it. If it's going to take you to the next level,
Mm-hmm.
do it. And we are all, military spouses in general are very educated
Mm-hmm.
compared to the rest of the population. Um, but it doesn't necessarily promise you that you will get that profession that you want,
Right.
because the experience is also critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that through the research where individuals have been out of the job um, environment for many years because they raised their family
Mm-hmm.
or raised their children and supported their spouses in the military and have a master's degree, and
Mm-hmm.
their imagination is, I want to get into this field now, and it's very difficult. So entry level is usually what you'll end up getting into,
Mm-hmm.
and you can certainly do that with a bachelor's degree, and in some cases not necessarily a degree, maybe an associate degree for that matter, what it depending on what it is. So
Right.
that's what I'm seeing and learning.
And it's funny because I sit here, I have, a bachelor's degree, two master's degrees, a couple certifications. My wife and I joke that we just we collect degrees and certifications like Pokemon cards. And then I came home from work yesterday and I was all fired up about something that our HR for the place that I work right now, our HR was doing. And I was saying how it didn't make sense. They could write it because there was a couple different jobs that I worked where I worked very closely with the HR for that organization. So I got to learn a lot about human resources. And I was
Mhm,
like, I don't
mhm.
understand why they're not doing it this way. They could make this whole hiring process easier. One sentence fixes all of this. And I came home and I was telling this to my wife. She said, "You can't go back to school." She's like, "I know it's about to come out of your mouth. You can't go back to school."
Uh,
Because and I think that's one thing you kind of mentioned this earlier. Military spouses were so used to change and we're so used to seeing a problem and wanting to fix it because as the spouse, we become the default fixer. Either our
yeah,
military member is gone or they're in training, they're deployed, or we're geobashing, we're geographically separated, and we become the person that fixes everything in our family. So when we see a problem, we're like, well, I know how to fix that. Or we're like, we see a problem, we're like, I don't know how to fix it, but I can figure it out real quick.
right,
And I
right,
really think that's one of the bigger strengths of the military spouse is we don't see because we see change and challenge so often, it's just another Tuesday to us.
right. Yeah. Yeah, just give me the challenge. And even
Hmm.
though I've never heard about it or know what it is, I'm going to figure it out. That's
Hmm.
really the attitude that I have found out through the research. And that's a great attitude. One of the things I learned, because that's also me, want to fix
Hmm.
everything. One of the things being a leader, and this is a different topic, but being a leader and a manager, you want to coach individuals to
Hmm.
get to the answer themselves, and that's really hard.
Yes.
So that's a huge challenge then, because you want to jump in and fix everything. So that's the only time I will, not fix it.
Yeah, there's always a time to sit back and go, they're almost there. They're almost there.
Yeah,
Okay, finally they made it. Thank God. I could have done it 20 minutes ago, but you finally made it there. No,
that's right.
I 100% understand what you're saying. Um, man, the there's just so much to like this topic is so broad. And because it impacts so many different people. Like I myself am currently in that underemployed statistic. Um, I we moved to an area where I have met more engineers in the past couple of months than I have met in my entire life because we're at Wright Pat in Dayton, Ohio, and it's a giant engineering base. I mean, we
Okay.
have AFIT is here. There's like three different research things going on here. So everybody here is either a mechanical or an electrical engineer. And my
Wow.
background is law enforcement and personnel security. So I've met tons and tons and tons of engineers, but because of my background, doesn't really fit this area. And kind of going back to
Oh,
what you were talking about earlier in, you know, moving to an area where there's the potential that your career is not necessarily readily available.
right.
I fall into that underemployment category of I am working as a landscape maintenance for the town that I live in part time because it was the only position I could find that didn't care I was a military spouse.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely a perfect example for underemployment. And yeah, it's just mind-boggling because how do you, so what are some things that we can do to solve for that, right? So we
Mhm.
know where these military installations are, and not all of them are actually around an installation either,
Mhm.
because it might be like the one that my husband was in Germany. It was part of a German military installation, so there's
Mhm.
nothing for the US military spouses for sure. That was definitely not a place to be as a military spouse.
Mhm.
Um, I really think there are certain things that you can, like individuals that are underemployed, can, it sucks to be in that
Mhm.
stage. Some of the things we can do is really taking your experiences that you had and how do you now articulate it in a way that resonates with that audience now, right? So the
Mhm.
audience of the engineering companies, and I don't know what products they're producing or what
Mhm.
they're working on, if they're just research, and how can you translate that in for that industry? Like
Mhm.
for example, if I were to take, even within the organization that I'm in the digital space, and I'm in product management. If I were to talk product management, digital transformation outside of the department
Mhm.
to like the practice area, like meaning the clinical areas,
Mhm.
they would not understand what I'm
Right.
saying. So I almost have to even internally just sort of change the way I'm talking about these
Mhm.
things. So I think there's definitely an opportunity that we have control over to change that. And how do we change it based on the companies that we might be targeting,
Mhm.
and really understand why we want to target them and what positions. And I really do think, and here's, so I'm in the Phoenix area, lots of opportunities, right, in terms of meetups. So you could certainly, and I'm just using this as an example. Maybe that company has a group on Meetup where they meet every Friday or whatever the case might be, or maybe a specific topic that they're talking about. You can certainly insert yourself into that.
Mhm.
Some of them are. A lot of them are still virtual, which I don't know that I like that, because that in person is so critical to make that
Mhm.
connection with individuals. So really getting into that environment, hearing them talk, hearing them
Mhm.
speak. You can certainly do Google search on them as well and listen to like their leadership team talking about things. So you
Mhm.
kind of adopting that language and then translating your skills in that way. And I don't know, I haven't done this, but I wonder if Chat GPT or some other generative AI tool could actually do that for you, using your current resume and then
Mhm.
really saying, okay, I want to target this industry. Now, how would you take my
Mhm.
resume and translate that into something that actually resonates with that audience?
Mhm.
So definitely that might help. And I'm not saying that it's going to necessarily get you where you want to go, but it may help you to land something within that particular industry and at least establish connections. And I
Mhm.
think those are critical. Again, we can't have enough networking. So that's how I would approach
Mhm.
that. There's really not one answer, right, to
Mhm.
that. And it's to just sort of experiment, try, and then see where you go and then make adjustments from there.
Right. And you're so right. You've said it a few times and you couldn't be more right about networking. I I know whenever we were leaving our last duty station to come here, I basically promised myself I was going to get better at networking with a purpose.
Absolutely.
When I first started, and I'll just use LinkedIn as the example because it's the one that most people are familiar with. You know, I started learning how to, instead of just going through and, oh, I went to school, this person went to the same school as me, and not really caring anything about what their industry was or their background or what they, what they believed. I was, oh, we both went to Georgetown. Oh, we both went to Northwestern State. And then I was like, okay, let's get a little more purposeful about this. Started looking for people that were in the same career field, were
Mhm,
military spouses that maybe they, um, either military spouses in the Air Force or they were military spouses in a different branch, but they had similar education and training as me, or looking for people that were lived in that area that had the same type of job training that I had or wanted to have.
mhm,
So
mhm.
is what do you recommend as far as when it comes to networking for spouses? What are
Yeah.
some ways that we can be better about networking?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And so, first of all, I am an introvert. So, which
Hmm.
means I really have to be deliberate about which groups I connect with, how much time I'm going to allocate. Because for us introverts,
Hmm.
it's almost like sucking the energy out of you.
Yes.
For extroverts, I think extroverts is a little different. So that's why I'm very purposeful, just like you mentioned. Okay, I'm going to prioritize these areas I want to focus on, and I'm going to attend meetings or go to these events.
Hmm.
It could also be so one, it would be professional interest. Like let's
Hmm.
say I am interested in AI in the Phoenix area. What I do is I go into the meetup, I go and search for any AI related meetups, and then just go meet with them a few times and see how that works out. Um, and then the other thing might be, hey, I am super interested in, because I do martial arts or I
Hmm.
do running and hiking, so I'm gonna search for those groups, and
Hmm.
they are in those venues as well. Or it might be Facebook group or some other platform that they announcing their existence. So, or maybe you're a mother and you're working mother, and they are, or parent who's working, and they you want to connect with other parents who are working and how they're doing it. Of course, military spouses, if you, so I'm not in a military environment, but
Hmm.
my first connection would be other military spouses, right? If
Right.
I were near an installation, military installation, that's what I would do. I would search those military spouses
Hmm.
and get engaged with those spouses, because they understand my story, they
Right.
understand where I'm coming from, and so forth. We can connect easily. So that's how I go about doing it. And I had to do it again when we
Hmm.
moved here 2 years ago. And that is exactly how I approached it. Then, of course, there are all sorts of online, virtual ways that you can get engaged in the topics that you're interested in. I would definitely, if you're looking for any professional type of engagement, hiring our heroes when they're doing an
Hmm.
event. If you have the time, attend it, because sometimes they have a lot of employers there, recruiters, and I've attended a couple of them, even though I wasn't looking, but that was
Hmm.
just sort of want to experience what that was like, and that was very beneficial. From there, you connect with them on LinkedIn. You can send a few
Hmm.
notes to them, and maybe you have your informational meeting at some point, right? So follow those connections. The other one is and I forget what it stands for. It's the ACP, which is also very much geared towards military and military spouses. And I'll find out what that is. But I have attended some of their webinars, and it
Hmm.
was super helpful. And I'm a professional, and I have access to a lot of different resources within my
Hmm.
organization, and that are free to me. But this one was very beneficial in terms of like talking about professional development, talking about networking, talking about how do you establish connection with the right individual as a military spouse, and how do
Hmm.
you talk about yourself as a military spouse. So I found that very, very helpful. I wish I knew. American Corporate Partnership, I think it's what it stands
Huh.
for. American Corporate Partnership. It's a
I've never
very,
heard of that one.
yeah, it's really, really well organized, very beneficial. So that's really how I would do it. But you don't want to compare yourself to others and
Right.
how others are doing it. You really want to think about yourself as a human being.
Hmm.
Your family's needs obviously come first. And what can you allow yourself in terms of time? But you have to give yourself time, whether that's once a week, once a month, that's all you can do. That's great. You just do it.
Hmm.
And not just wait for something to happen. Because sometimes, things might happen where you're lucky and things just sort of fall in your lap. But a lot of the things that I think most spouses have done is because intentionally focused and
Hmm.
intentionally engagement on their part as well.
Yeah, I like you just said. Sometimes people get lucky and it falls in their lap. I've I love the phrase "luck favors the prepared." So it's
that's
like because
that's a
it
good
can
thing.
it can you can be lucky and it fall in your lap, but
Yeah.
if you're not preparing yourself for the opportunity to show up, then you
Yeah.
might not even recognize that it's the opportunity you were looking for.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah. Great point.
So, another thing that I think, and you kind of mentioned this, and it went a different way than what I was thinking you were going to go with it. But you said, not comparing yourself to others. And I
Oh,
think as military spouses, I know for me personally, whenever I'm starting to feel, oh, I've been unemployed for a year or I'm underemployed, and then I'll hear stories from other spouses that are for all intents and purposes are worse than mine. Either they've been trying to find job work for multiple years, or they're the only job they could find is um as a door dasher or something like that, and they're super unhappy about it. And then I start going, man, who am I to complain
mhm.
about my situation whenever their situation seems worse than mine?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can't really compare yourself to other spouses because everybody's story and journey is different.
So
and
different. Yeah.
and maybe that other spouse that's a door dasher, maybe maybe they were trying to find a job waiting tables,
Hmm. Hmm.
and there's just nobody hiring, maybe, and so they got a job as a door dasher. Whereas somebody wanted, like myself, who's wanted to get a bit more professional, more corporate, is unable to do that. So finding the job I have, everybody's journey is different.
So different.
And
Yeah.
so giving yourself the grace and the understanding to realize that my journey is not the same as somebody else's. So
Hmm.
you are more comfortable telling your story.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think one thing I would add to that, Mike, is that yes, just think about yourself, and
Mhm.
but you do want to incrementally move forward and make
Right.
progress. So that's what you look at. So what did I do compared
Mhm.
to last month, and whether that's networking or whether that's gaining a new skill set or whether that's helping a child, right? So I mean, all those little things that actually add up to
Right.
something. That's how you want to look at yourself. So I found myself, I used to like compare myself to others all the
Mhm.
time, and it just sort of a race that I can't win, right? So,
Right.
and then it really wears you down. So, until I made that mind shift into, okay, how am I doing
Mhm.
today and how am I going to do tomorrow? And as long as I'm making progress, comparing myself to the day before, that's what matters to me. And that was a very peaceful mindset, I
Mhm.
think, and it's really makes you focus on the right things from my perspective.
No, absolutely. A good friend of mine, his personal mantra is to live every day as plus one.
There
If
you
I
go.
can if I
Yeah,
can do at least one thing better than I did yesterday, then it was a good day.
yeah, absolutely.
And it's
That's it.
moving in the right
Yeah, your friend
direction.
said it well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he has a tendency to do that. He tends to break things down to my level. And I'm like, oh, that's so simple, but I love it.
absolutely. Yeah,
Because again, he's not comparing himself to the person next to him. He's just like, nope. If I can do one thing better than yesterday,
yeah,
then I'm doing all
absolutely.
right.
Yeah. It just gives you that peace of mind, and it puts you at the center
Right.
of what you need to do, and puts that accountability on yourself too.
Mhm.
So, um, and you know what you see out on the social platforms, and all of them, I
Mhm.
don't think there's any exception, is all the great things that people are doing. They hardly ever will mention the sufferings that they're
Mhm.
going through, and that is just so much part of life. We all have
Mhm.
challenges that we go through, and nobody really talks about that, but you know what they are
Right.
yourself, and I know what mine are, and then so some days are going to be better than other
Mhm.
days.
Yeah, social media is definitely most people's highlight reel.
Yeah,
And a,
absolutely.
and a friend of mine, I swear I mentioned her on almost every episode, and she's going to get tired of me saying her name. But my friend Heather Campbell, who I've known for many years
Oh
now,
yeah.
she posted recently about an event she was at where she was all dressed up and smiling, and she was like, and this is the part you didn't see, because it was the same weekend that she had to put their family dog down that they had for years. And I
Yeah.
mean, that was just emotional and gut wrenching. And she's like, this is the side you didn't see. Everybody saw this picture of me being happy and dressed up and smiling, but this was 24 hours later. And so she was
Yeah.
like, don't let
That's a
social
good,
media fool
yeah.
you into thinking that everybody only has good days.
Oh, so true. That's so well said. And I think I follow Heather on LinkedIn as well. So I don't remember seeing that, but I'm going to look that up. That's such a great way to really put it
Mhm.
in a realistic way, how our
Yeah,
lives are.
I don't know. I don't remember if she put it on LinkedIn. Wouldn't be surprised if she did. I follow her on every platform.
Oh, gotcha.
We
Gotcha.
were we were together at Eielson the first time she was there. So I've known her
Okay.
since 2015.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
she is anything good you read about her is true, and I will defend that
Awesome.
until the day I die. She's an amazing individual. But yeah, social media is such a highlight reel, and people use that to say, look at me." But I think it's important to take that step back and realize, you know what, that person, they have bad days too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we do. We do have bad days.
We do. A question that I thought of earlier, and you said whenever your husband got a position to go overseas, you made the decision to stay. How old were your kids at that point, if you don't mind?
Oh, they were grown-ups.
Okay,
So
they
yeah,
were already grown up. Okay.
yeah, they were all grown-ups and they're
Mhm,
doing their own thing. Our youngest was in college, freshman,
mhm.
I think. Well, actually, she was a junior in high school.
Okay.
And then, yeah, so they were grown-ups from my
Mhm,
perspective. So it was very easy for me to actually go travel, see my family.
mhm.
So that was a really interesting way of living the military spouse life,
Mhm.
because I had my job that I continued, plus my kids were doing,
Right.
their thing and grown up. So there's that freedom. And then really having the time with my spouse
Mhm.
in Germany, because it's not easy to live far apart.
Right.
So that really helped us tremendously in terms of our ability to do that
Mhm.
particular assignment. And then, of course, I got to experience the country I grew up in,
Right.
which was an eye opener to me because I love Germany. I love everything
Mhm.
about it. I thought, and then I went back and there are great things about the U.S. that I appreciate,
Mhm.
that I didn't necessarily see in
Right.
Germany, and that's the ability as a professional to get a lot done.
Mhm.
Uh, and and the example that I used, because when we are military spouses and our spouses go away, we have to do the things
Mhm.
in addition to our children,
Yep.
cooking and household. Well, there are certain things you have to do about maintenance, right? So maintenance of maybe the lawn equipment,
Mhm.
right? So honestly, the way I did it in the US, I called up the lawn equipment company. They came
Right.
into my house while I was at work, grabbed the equipment, took it
Mhm.
away, and then brought it back, whatever, two days later. And I never even saw them. I know they did it. I
Right.
paid them electronically, and that was super feasible.
Mhm.
I could not do that in Germany.
Right.
There's no way to be able to get that done in Germany. And you would think that they are digitally advanced, and I think they are way more advanced now than they were in 2017.
Mhm.
But that's it's just not feasible, and have to take a day off and do
Mhm.
this and do that, and then not getting your lawn equipment back for 2 weeks. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just not the right way to do it. So that's just one example.
Right. Well, and then
um,
if I was talking to a friend of mine who we went to college together. She was stationed. Her husband was stationed in Germany for a little while, and they lived overseas. And they still really don't use credit cards over there. That's not a very
oh, that
common
was the
thing.
other, yeah. You know, this is the reality of my life. I just lost a friend, one of my
Mhm.
best friends in Germany, suddenly.
Mhm.
She she had a brain aneurysm nobody knew about. So,
Right.
and we were, as classmates, we were actually trying to get something done for the funeral, and we did. And none of them took Apple Cash,
Right.
PayPal even.
Mhm.
And so I had to send money in a very old-fashioned way that took some time and cost me a lot of money to
Right.
send it. So that's what life is.
Mhm.
There, here, I mean, I don't have my wallet and I go somewhere and I can pay with my phone. So, or my watch.
Paying with the watch still gets people. If I left my phone in my vehicle or something, I'll tap it on my watch and like, what did you just do? Like it worked, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I know it's kind of scary. There's the scary part about it, but it's also that convenience. And I think
Right.
the convenience creates that time saver. And we all, like you said early on, we all have limited time. So we're
Yes.
trying to get as much done as possible. The things that are important to us, right?
Right.
So it's not that we're trying to continuously do some brainless things, but more so the things that we have to get done.
Mhm. Oh man. So I know we've talked about a lot when it comes to military spouse employment and about a lot of the different barriers, things that we can do with, and I compared it to an onion earlier as the way I've kind of started explaining this military spouse conundrum, if you will, is because there's never going to be a single answer. I was talking to a friend of mine on another episode, and I was like, and I had mentioned the idea of maybe pushing spouses towards blue collar work if that was something they were interested in. And then she very quickly was like, "Well, have you thought about if if you're a blue collar worker, having to do call outs in the evening, and if your spouse is deployed, what is that going to look like?" And I was like, that's why this is an onion. There's never really going to be a solid answer. But if you could think of the biggest barrier that you have seen from your research and from your time being an advocate for this kind of space, what do you see as being the biggest barrier or the easiest barrier to start breaching would be, and where should we start looking to start chiseling away and peeling this onion back?
Yeah, that's a really big question, but
It is a big question. I'm sorry.
yeah, that's okay. Let me start with this. So first of all, I really don't care what kind of job you do. I
Mhm.
think you need to figure out what makes your heart sing, right?
Right.
What is important to you? And I don't care if it requires an education or not,
Mhm.
because there are lots of opportunities where uh, for opportunity jobs that you can do where you don't need an education. So that's education is not always an answer, especially if that's not your thing.
Mhm.
Then don't compare yourself to others. Do the thing that you want to do. So what I mean by that, education will make certain things, entry
Mhm.
points, a lot easier for you. But if your heart desires that you want to learn how to code and how to
Mhm.
become an IT engineer, you certainly have resources out there that you could probably use. A lot of them probably free through networking,
Mhm.
and even classes here and there on Coursera or and I think some of that actually the military you might be able to get through the military you can do and just start doing the work. And those
Right.
are now that particular job in industry you can actually do remotely. But maybe your desire is in building homes or
Mhm.
becoming an electrician, becoming a plumber. Those are all great professions.
Mhm.
We need them so dearly, and we don't have enough of them. But they make it a little bit more difficult to really take it with you when you go. In some cases, it might be okay. In some cases, it might not be as easy. So that's that. So
Mhm.
you're actually learning a profession, you're training a profession, you're not really doing the education. But if you're doing the education, be mindful. You might have to start from the bottom as at an entry level,
Mhm.
and think about, especially if you are early in your military journey, think about what jobs can you do that you can take with you.
Right.
So those are jobs primarily that you can do remotely, and and those are the ones you might want to focus. But if you say, you know what, my heart really desires to become a nurse, so I want to be a nurse, and then you have to be, obviously you can't do that remotely in most the cases, and you have that licensure part that you have to worry about, but you can do it. It's feasible. You just, you say that that's what I want to do, and that's what you put your effort into, and figure out how to do it. Because in many cases you will have, even at the larger installations, some military type of medical facilities where you can actually do the profession. But in all of this, it's really the networking piece. I think we've talked about that many times. So that if you're starting out new, the networking is critical. If you are in a profession, networking is critical. And if you are in a profession, and like myself have been in many years, what you do then is you have to um, acquire sponsors. And the sponsors are not your military service members. Those are individuals that who are very familiar with the work that you're doing, who can actually recommend you for promotion, who can help you to get to that next level. So those are sponsors. And we never talked about the mentors either. So mentors are, I mentor and I have mentors. So and in both ways, it's super beneficial, because with mentoring others, you would think they're learning. I'm actually learning quite a bit just through that mentorship. But then, of course, having mentors in the things that you want to work on specifically are also very beneficial. So these are all things you can do regardless of what the profession is that you're going into, the networking and the mentoring and the sponsorship. So those are some things that you have control over that you can do. The rest of it is really depends on the supervisors that you are working with, and then the organization and their willingness to do certain things for the employees, right? Some organizations are much more engaged and regard employees at a much higher rate than other organizations. So that's why it's critical for you to think about what company do you want to work for, and what are their values. I mean, I've heard others being in organizations where the company was doing certain things where that just does not make sense to me. That why would you work for that company? You don't have to work for that company. You can, even if it is the last thing that you have to do, I rather work for a company where I'm getting paid less than this company that's not doing the right thing. So I think it's very critical to do the research about the company, what their values are, how they align with what your values, because a lot of times when you find that right company that you're working for, most likely you will get further ahead because your values are aligned with theirs. So those are some things that you can do. But again, it's a three-way partnership, right? Yourself plus the employee, the supervisor, and the employer. So that's those are, you have less control over those. But where you have control over it, go do it. Don't wait for others to do it for you. Learn from others. Reach out. You can reach out to me at any time if anybody wants to learn what I have done. I'm definitely not not an expert in everything, but what I can do is share with you what I have done if I have experienced it, and then of course I would ask other military spouses to do the same thing. Help each other.
Yeah, I definitely think that if there was one thing I could get military spouses to do differently from what you typically see, it's to support and lift each other up more instead of saying, oh, well, oh, it must be nice to have that as your only problem because look at my
Okay,
problems. That
interesting.
I really, and you don't see it as much on LinkedIn because on LinkedIn, I think people try to be purposefully more professional and more uplifting because there really doesn't seem to be a lot of room for negativity on LinkedIn because that seems to get snuffed out pretty quickly. But definitely on a lot of the other social media platforms, you you tend to see it a little bit more where there's a lot more negativity on the other platforms. So I kind of wish that we could do a little better with each other in that space because it's hard
So
enough
that
as it is.
Yeah, and that we have control over, Mike. That's an
Exactly.
excellent point. Um, and maybe I'm a little naive and did not realize that because again, my world has been the Army Reserve now than the
Mm-hmm.
last 2 years, where I'm in the rest of the community, right? So I'm not
Right.
really close to military spouses, but I definitely would stress that. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think we all have something to share. We all have learned things, and
Mm-hmm.
if you can imagine if you brought that together and help others, especially those that are just starting out. And if
Yeah.
we can make their lives easier, that would be super impactful.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a volunteer work.
It really could. And
Yeah,
there's probably a volunteer org like that already there, because
absolutely.
there's so many different ones that are amazing. Like I'm like myself, I'm in Team Red, White, and Blue. I've been a member of that organization for many, many years. It's a wonderful organization. I love it. I love being a
Yeah.
part of it. Is there any question that you wish I would have asked that I have not asked?
Um, the one thing I did not talk about is like, and I did not want to stress this too much. Well, one, I think being a military spouse as a male, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a very different story. Again, I don't recall what the percentage is. It's probably maybe 10% of the spouses are male,
That pretty
but
close. I think it's up to 11 or
oh,
12%.
is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know it's a small population, but to me, I think it's an opportunity that we can address because one, I think the way we have things set up, even in the
Mm-hmm.
installations and so forth, it's very much female focused in
Mm-hmm.
terms of spouses. Then the other thing I did pick up in my research that the female spouses are not maybe as welcoming of the male spouses in their support groups,
I
which
can
I
confirm.
found okay.
Absolutely
So
can confirm.
wow, unfortunately, uh, and and I think there's an opportunity because I mean I've always been around diversity,
Hmm.
even with the company that I'm with, and and when we have that, I've seen it.
Right.
We have so much more outcome and a much more that we can give our own
Hmm.
selves and then our communities. It's so I call that diversifying it,
Hmm.
even though with that, even though their population is a lot smaller. The other thing that they have to put up with, it's really, and I think maybe you even experienced it yourself, is that when you are seen in public
Hmm.
with as a male military spouse with your spouse in the military, they actually assume it's the male who's in the
Hmm.
military and not the women. So
Oh yeah.
to me, it's that right persona of the military spouse. I
Hmm.
think that's so critical that we need to make sure that we understand what that persona is and it's not
Hmm.
what we think it is. So that's one thing. The other thing is that foreign born military spouses, and I include myself into it, and the parallels that I've discovered being a military spouse, foreign born, and living in the US. So some of the experiences that I've actually gone through myself in the US are very similar and maybe even more challenging than being overseas as a military spouse who's an American and
Hmm.
in those installations. You are in your environment, you have that military installation and you
Hmm.
kind of have that comfort a little bit, but everything else around you is so foreign that
Right.
it's sort of exciting at first, like the first month or two,
Hmm.
and then you sort of fall into this space where you miss everything like that you used to, like the smells and the
Right.
cooking and the families and the friends that you've had. But the biggest part is that professional development that's very, very challenging
Hmm.
because you sort of have to start from ground zero. And to me, I was very young, so I had to really think about what I need to do. So for me, it was critical to get education because I
Right.
could not get a job that had benefits and I had to
Hmm.
provide for my family along with my husband, but we had children, we didn't have health insurance
Hmm.
and so forth. So that those are some of the benefits you have when you live in Germany. You have health insurance
Right.
you don't have to worry about. So those are probably some of the differences as a foreign born, and you really have to step up your game and
Yeah.
build that. network, like that's personal support network as well as the professional. And that's what you do when you're a military spouse overseas, right? You kind of have to step up your game and really build it for you and focus on the right things and go through all the challenges with your profession and I hope you support each other. That would be my only thing I will say. Military spouses support each other because we are our own advocates, and if we can't stand up for ourselves, it will be harder for us to tell our stories and have ask others to do it for us.
Absolutely. And I would imagine your story would be pretty similar to my friend Helga's story. So whenever we lived in Germany, we haven't been in Germany yet. When we lived in Georgia, we became very close to our neighbor that lived across the street from us, who was retired Air Force. He met and married his wife, and she's from Germany. I don't remember which part of Germany, but she's born and raised in Germany, and brought her, back to the U.S. as a foreign-born spouse, with English as a very broken second language. And then they had their first child. She still was not a very good English speaker, and then he deployed. So she had to navigate all of that stuff as a non-native speaker with little to no support. And she did what every other military spouse does, and she figured it out.
Yes.
So I would imagine your story would be very similar.
Yeah, we are very good at that. So that's
Yes.
great. That's great.
Okay. Well,
Yeah. Otherwise, no, I think you've done a great job. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
awesome. Well, Zülbiye, where can people connect with you? I know we connected on LinkedIn. Is that normally where you prefer for people to connect with you at?
Oh, absolutely. I'm of course on LinkedIn, and you can find me under Zülbiye Jorgensen, and I'm sure you'll have that in your notes.
Yep.
And then I am also on Instagram and Facebook, but LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. And then also through email, if you want to send me a note, and that's zulbiyej@gmail.com, and have any questions or even feedback. Maybe I have said something that didn't resonate with you or it's not right, and I'm also open to hearing some of that, because it's so important to hear that feedback from others, so that we can have a much more accurate story next time.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today and having this conversation with me. I got to run. I've got to get my kids. I got to get my kids to their sporting events. They both have practice in two different areas, so I've got to get them.
Oh,
Got to get
wow.
going to get them to that.
The fun of being a dad.
Hey, you know what? Like I told you before we started recording, I would be lying if I said I didn't love it. And I know one day it's not going to be here anymore, and I'm going to miss it. So I'm going to soak it up every second of it while I can. So you have a wonderful rest of your day. I've truly enjoyed it, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for having me. You have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Awesome. You as well. Bye.